"You're prehistoric," he said, grinning like a YouTube prankster. He even chuckled after, like it was a punchline. As if I should laugh too at myself. At 22 years, at everything I'd built in this office with glass walls and whiteboards filled with code that no one else in this room could even read. The silence behind me was surgical. The younger analysts, the interns, the new hires with startup energy and zero substance, they didn't make a sound. No one blinked. I was holding my coffee. That's what I remember. My travel mug from the 2008 merger, chipped at the rim, heat fading from the sides. Brandon Wells, newly anointed VP of Innovation, son of the CEO, was standing next to my desk, leaning on it like it was his now. "I'm serious," he said, like the cameras were still rolling. "You don't evolve. You get extinct." I didn't say anything. "My name is Miles Reed. I'm 49 years old. Or I was that morning, felt a lot older by the time I walked out of that building. I was the lead systems architect at Virion Technologies, a name nobody cared about until we started handling digital infrastructure for half the major banks in the Southwest. I was here before the logo had a color palette, before we had funding, before Brandon was even shaving. "Security's on their way," he added, like he was being patient. "You can save us the trouble and leave your keycard." My knuckles were white on that chipped coffee mug. But my face? Blank. Years in server rooms at 3 a.m. taught me how to keep cool when everything overheated. I set the mug down gently, reached into my pocket, pulled out the badge. It still had the old company name on it. Virion used to be Cirrus Core before the rebrand. The plastic was worn at the corners from 22 years of swiping in before dawn and out long after sunset. I laid the card on the desk like a folded flag. Brandon gave me a thumbs up, still smiling like this was a skit. Behind him, Tanner, his strategic tech consultant, was hovering near my terminal. 25, former Twitch streamer. Once wrote a Python bot to farm skins in Valorant and called that infrastructure experience. "Hey Miles," Tanner said, eyes flicking to the dual monitor setup I'd spent years customizing. Where's the gateway script for the offshore replication node?" Brandon barked a laugh. "Don't worry, man," he said. "We'll figure it out. Go enjoy your early retirement." I looked around. No one made eye contact. Just glowing screens and blank faces pretending to type. I nodded once and turned toward the elevator. My palms were sweating. But I didn't let the badge slip. Not until I was out of sight. The lobby was quiet. I passed the wall of founder portraits, Frank Leclerc's oil-painted scowl at the top. Brandon's father below. Younger and smiling. I'd had beers with both of them. Spent Christmas in their server closets. Outside, Phoenix heat punched through my dress shirt. My truck was waiting at the curb, the same one I bought with my first retention bonus after I rescued their database during a triple power outage. Funny how fast gratitude gets versioned out. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the leather until it creaked. My badge was still in my pocket. I hadn't left it after all. Maybe a part of me didn't want to give it up. Maybe another part already knew I'd need it again. The thing about being prehistoric, we remember what came before you, and we remember how to bury the bodies. I hadn't even pulled out of the parking lot when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered. Instinct. "Miles? Hey, it's Rob from Sinfin. You guys changed something in the sync protocol? I just got kicked out of the ledger integration." I stared at the streetlight ahead. Red. Not changing. "You're still listed as our escalation contact," he added. I didn't respond. I was already pulling my laptop bag into my lap. My fingers moved before my thoughts caught up. The kid had already touched something he didn't understand. The light in the motel room was soft and yellow. The kind that made everything look older than it was. My fingertips moved across the keyboard, steady and sure. Even if the rest of me felt like a half-stripped wire. 5 days since Brandon threw me out of my own office. And now I was watching the company implode from a folding chair at a Motel 6 off Camelback. 3 monitors. One for active logs. One for mirrored backups. One for playback security footage scraped off an unsecured endpoint they'd forgotten to decommission. sloppy. I'd written those alerts myself, tucked them deep in the old stack where no one ever looked. The logs were screaming. Tanner had no clue what he was doing. Not a single clue. He'd triggered 7 failed authentications in the sandbox environment, probably trying to brute force his way into the replication layer. One more failed attempt and he'd lock himself out for 72 hours. That layer controlled the distributed ledgers, the financial heartbeat of Virion's biggest accounts. Sinfin, Archway, Delcor, all systems I'd built in the back of a rented office suite when our entire tech department was 3 guys and a stack of Costco routers. Now I was watching the whole thing unravel in real time. I leaned back, took a sip from the vending machine coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through cardboard, and watched as another alert flashed across the screen. Internal file redirect. Not deleted, moved. That was important. The difference between someone clearing clutter and someone trying to rewrite history. The metadata told me enough. Origin folder. Core divided by vault. Divided by auth keys. Destination. TMP. Divided by archive. BNDR. That BNDR extension wasn't company standard. It was Brandon. I opened a terminal window and traced the activity upstream. Whoever had logged in under his override code bypassed the internal #salt protocol I'd built years ago. He shouldn't have even known it existed. Only 3 people ever did. 2 of them were gone. The last one, me, was supposed to be extinct. They didn't just fire me. They tried to erase me. I pulled up the old access map, the one I'd built from scratch because the vendor tool couldn't handle our complexity. The connections flared to life across the screen like a nervous system under an MRI. Data pulses, logins, redirects. I watched the patterns, the little flickers of desperation, Tanner opening shell after shell. Brandon overriding firewall rules, patches being pushed without validation. It was a mess, but it wasn't criminal. Not yet. Until I found it. One of the redirect logs showed a transfer to an external node, an address outside the company's AWS umbrella. That wasn't allowed. I pivoted to the IP and ran a reverse WHOIS. The registrar came back in seconds. Crimson Stream Limited, a cloud processing firm based out of the Cayman Islands. Sounded harmless if you didn't know the lingo, but the domain owner was listed as Brandon Wells. No company alias, no privacy protection. Just his name, tied to a crypto shell company registered offshore. I sat there, blinking at the screen, listening to the hum of the motel's air conditioner pushing out recycled heat. Brandon hadn't just taken my job. He was using the systems I built to funnel something. Data, funds, contracts through a ghost company overseas. The stupidity of it was staggering. And arrogant. He hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. I stood up, cracked my knuckles, and stared out the small window toward the freeway. Neon signs buzzed outside: cheap food, cheap rooms, and cheaper decisions. I remembered installing our first backup server on milk crates because the racks hadn't arrived yet. How I worked 3 straight days to get the load balancer stable for our first client demo. I'd written most of our stack in solitude. While everyone else pitched to investors, I was the architecture, the foundation. Every script, every switch, every shortcut, they were me. Now I was watching a toddler play with loaded weapons. I turned back to the screen, hands steady. Not yet. I wasn't ready to act. But I'd seen enough to know this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about containment. The desert rolled past my window in shades of rust and regret. 60 miles east of Phoenix, somewhere between nowhere and forgotten. I turned off the highway and followed a dirt road that wound through sun-bleached rock formations and sagging fences. At the end of the road sat a sun-faded adobe house with no visible security system. No gate and no welcome mat. Just a wind-chimed porch and a flagpole that hadn't seen a flag in a decade. Frank LeClaire opened the door before I knocked. He looked older, but not softer. Still had the jawline of a man who once scared venture capitalists into signing checks they didn't understand. His white button-down was half-wrinkled, untucked, sleeves rolled to the forearms. Age had added lines to his face, but his eyes hadn't dulled. "Miles," he said, stepping aside. "Took you longer than I expected." I walked in without answering. The air inside smelled like burnt coffee and dry paper. Books lined the walls. Real ones, engineering manuals, legal tomes, a few military biographies. A stack of newspapers sat in one corner, bound with a shoelace. He motioned to the table. I opened my laptop. I didn't bother with introductions or pleasantries. I showed him the logs, the redirects, the offshore registry with Brandon's name typed out in all caps like a middle finger to compliance. He watched in silence, tapping a pencil against the edge of the table. When I brought up the ledger discrepancies from Sinfin and Delcor, he leaned in closer. Jesus, he muttered, scratching his chin. He really did it. He's using my infrastructure. I said, the whole stack. Rebranded it Phoenix Core. Even slapped some AI buzzwords on it for the investors. Frank sat back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes closed for a moment. I warned his father, he said finally. Told him the boy had the instincts of a cornered raccoon. You hand a raccoon the keys to a food truck. Don't act shocked when it explodes. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Why? I sold my seat, not my silence. He looked at me. I still own 8%. Silent shares, enough to call a vote if I want to start a war. I've outlived 2 wives, 4 CTOs, and my patience for children playing king. You're saying you won't do anything. I'm saying you will. He tapped the screen. You didn't drive out here for nostalgia. You want my blessing? You've got it. You want my signature? He reached for a folder on the bookshelf and tossed it across the table. Power of attorney. Dated but still active. Then do what I can't. Clean house. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Not yet. Frank, I said slowly. How deep is this? Deeper than you know. He bled out 2 subsidiary divisions to prop up that crypto shell. Liquidated support staff, folded R&D into marketing and told them to brand innovation. The investors are blind because he's loud and young and says blockchain twice in every meeting. Tanner's just there for optics. He's window, dressing. Kid probably doesn't know how many zeros are in a terabyte. I nodded. I should have been angry, but all I felt was cold. I'm not looking to sue. I said, this isn't about court. No, Frank said, this is about control. Burn the facade down, Miles. Show the investors what they're really funding. He poured 2 glasses of something that smelled like regret and history, but I didn't drink mine. My mind was already spinning forward. Brandon's pitching Series C, next week. I said, he's using my legacy code. Selling it as proprietary, AI integrated, scalable, modular. Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Funny thing about legacy, he said. It's hard to fake when the original architect's still breathing. I closed the laptop. The desert wind kicked up outside, rattling something loose on the porch. I knew what came next. Now, I had the leverage. All I needed was the timing. The hotel curtains were drawn shut, but the glow of 3 monitors lit the room like stage lights waiting for the curtain to rise. Friday, 10 a.m. Brandon's big show. He was calling it the Phoenix Core Reveal, a flashy name for a stolen legacy wrapped in vaporware. Behind the bluster, there was nothing proprietary, just my old code. Renamed and stripped of context, duct taped together with enough buzzwords to make a VC salivate. 3 days. Until launch. I didn't have time to burn the house down. I needed to make it collapse under its own weight. The payload had to be precise, recursive, invisible, silent. It wouldn't delete anything. That would make me the villain. No. This was a mirror, a perfect forensic reflection. Every file Brandon redirected, every login override, every transaction rerouted through his offshore crypto shell. My code would catch it, log it, copy it, and compile it into a report that even the SEC couldn't ignore. The brilliance was in the layering. No flag, no trigger. It simply watched. By the time I finished the script, my eyes were burning. I ran it through my own private sandbox 5 times before embedding it. It passed through, clean, no alerts, No hang-ups, just like I designed it to. I zipped it into the update scheduled for their Thursday night maintenance push. Tanner wouldn't notice. He barely knew how to commit changes without breaking dependencies. That night, I sat on the motel bed with a glass of warm whiskey and an open terminal window. I watched the system take the update. Line by line, the payload tucked itself into the back end like a sleeper cell. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the low whir of the air conditioner struggling against the desert heat. The countdown had started. I remembered Brandon, when he was 12. Frank used to bring him into the office on slow weekends, said it would teach him discipline. I'd let him sit in the corner while I ran diagnostics, sometimes even showed him basic commands on a spare monitor. He liked the attention, but not the work. His interest died the second he had to type more than 2 lines without a dopamine hit. What he wanted wasn't to understand the machine. He wanted to own it. Even then, he wanted the throne, not the map that got you there. By Wednesday, the company's internal systems were humming louder than usual. Brandon had scheduled back-to-back pitch prep sessions. Valiant Capital's delegation was flying in Thursday night. The board was being spoon-fed talking points. Tanner was busy trying to polish the interface Brandon had slapped over my architecture like spray paint on a blueprint. I spent that evening building the package. 137 pages of access logs, server redirects, and transaction trails that pointed to Crimson Stream Limited on the Caymans, the shell company's ownership registration, the cloud storage receipts, the false income forecasts Brandon had fed the accountants, all tied to timestamps and IPs. I didn't have to fabricate anything. The truth was damning enough. I encrypted the bundle and scheduled it for distribution at exactly 10:01 a.m. Friday morning, 60 seconds after Brandon stepped on stage. Each recipient was handpicked. Every board member, every investor, Valiant's general counsel, and 2 watchdog agencies that still had teeth. No more speculation. No more questions. Only evidence. Friday came fast. I sat in the parking garage beneath the event center, windows cracked, phone resting in my lap. The crowd had already gathered upstairs, suits and venture capitalists, all eager to see the future through the eyes of a fraud. My laptop buzzed once. Internal stream confirmed live. Brandon was taking the stage. I pulled up the timer on my phone and watched it tick down. 0:59. 0:45. 0:30. I adjusted the mirror so I could see the building's entrance. 0:15. 0:10. The elevator lights blinked as it ascended. 0:05. I tapped the screen. Send. The timer disappeared. I leaned back in my seat and waited for the sound of gravity doing what it always does. Sometimes you don't burn bridges. You wire them with C4. I sat in the driver's seat, parked beneath a 3-story monument to corporate ego, watching the live stream buffer on my phone. The signal was clean. Upstairs, Brandon stood on a stage framed in LED panels and self-importance. He wore a black turtleneck like it meant something. Behind him, the company logo pulsed with every beat of the intro music, Phoenix Core, rising from the ashes of the very system he'd tried to erase. He was already mid-sentence, something about modular architecture and AI-driven scalability. Half the words weren't even arranged in a way that made sense. But the suits in the front row nodded anyway. Investors love the smell of nonsense when it's served on branded slides. He had them. For the moment. The projector clicked. Slide change. Brandon glanced at the screen behind him. That's when it started. Instead of the next slide, a black terminal window appeared. At first, the audience thought it was part of the show. Stylish. Minimal. Then the text began to populate line by line. Timestamps. Server paths. Redirects. Password overrides. The room shifted. Brandon's voice faltered. The terminal scrolled faster now. Lines of raw log data pulled directly from the heart of Virion's infrastructure. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dressed up. It didn't need to be. It was proof digital blood, splattered across the walls in cold, sharp detail. And it was live. I watched from the garage as his smile cracked under the lights. In the stream, someone from Valiant stood up. 2 others followed. One pulled out a phone. A muffled voice answered. His reply was clear. Yes, we're pressing charges. Brandon turned to the projector, stammered something about a visual bug. Tried to wave it off. But the code didn't stop. It flipped to the offshore transaction logs. Crimson Stream Limited. Cayman Registry. His name in bold. The screen displayed side-by-side comparisons, projected income versus actual liquidity. A 41% gap. The kind of gap people go to prison over. I could hear the shift in the room. Silence broken by mutters. Then voices rising. A man from the board stood and pointed. Security moved toward the stage. Brandon stepped back, his mic still live. Breath heavy in the speakers. He started to yell, but it wasn't commanding. It was unraveling. The stream cut out. I closed the app and turned off the phone. By the time I pulled onto the freeway, he'd be in a conference room with 3 lawyers and an HR rep trying to sanitize the blood. Tanner would vanish, probably already halfway to the airport. His contract voided, and NDA sealed. The board would convene, and Frank LeClaire would walk back in like a ghost wearing armor, calm and pissed in equal measure. I had no interest in being in the room when that happened. My laptop chimed in the passenger seat. Email notification. I didn't check it. I knew what it would say. Thank you. That was brilliant. You saved us. But I wasn't looking for applause. I didn't want vindication. I wanted distance. The motel room was already cleared out by the time I got back. Just a key on the nightstand and the echo of recycled air. I packed silently, folded the laptop into the bag, zipped it up like sealing off a chapter. Brandon once said I was prehistoric. He was right. Dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years. His reign lasted just over 5 weeks. And extinction? It's always self-inflicted.